Okay, now we're all set. All right, well, let's open in prayer, and then I'm just going to let Bob take it away, and that doesn't count against your time. Okay. All right, Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for just the opportunity to be here and to learn about this really critical worldview, why it's important to understand why creationism is so important to us and how it even refutes evolution. And I just pray that you would anoint Bob and use him and let this be a great and fruitful time together. And thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Cool. Again, thanks for being here. This is I'm looking forward to this. I think it's going to be fun. At least I find this stuff fun. I don't know that it was always fun for me, but my name is Bob Morris. I've got no theological training whatsoever, but I love Jesus, and I believe that the Bible is His word, and if it says something, I take it for truth. However, I think when I was in high school, I was taught that evolution was fact, and I was like a good student, and so I believed it. But that kind of clashed when I got to church, and our youth group would talk about stuff, and it's like, okay, so my ancestor was a monkey, and that doesn't work when you get to church. So that caused me a lot of angst. It didn't sit well with me. I didn't know how to, it's like, you're growing up, you're a kid, you're a child, you believe what you're taught in school, you think that these teachers are like teaching stuff that's real. And then how do these two worlds come together? And they weren't coming together for me, and that didn't work. I didn't know how I could go through life and have that kind of thing. So that's kind of where the journey for me started, and it's continued to grow and develop since then. There's kind of a plethora of resources here. Evolution stuff on one side and creation stuff on the other, and just me trying to figure it out. So the Bible starts out, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then he goes on to elaborate how he did it in 6 days. And then the seventh day he rested. And then in 1 John chapter 1, verse 1, no, not John 1:1, John says that in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word created everything. Nothing that was created without God. So from that, that's kind of where I started. So first question. How many of you believe in evolution? I mean, it's like, okay, so let me take a step back. The first time I made this presentation was to a bunch of high school students that were being taught evolution. So that question was a little bit more, I'm guessing that this group is going to have a little bit different background. But there's people in the room that believe that evolution explains everything, that is the truth. So this was a little bit more meaningful. It had a little bit more of a weight to it in their eyes. So the next question is something that they would have been, studying in their science classes. What are the evidences for evolution? And I hope this is a dialogue, not just me talking. So if you've got questions at any point, you don't even need to raise your hand. You can just interrupt me. I'm good with that. So in science, you would have learned that there's 4 main thought patterns or reasonings that support the theory of evolution. So has anybody got a clue what some of those 4 genres might be?
I didn't understand your question.
So, let's see, how do we say it? There's different scientific evidences that we use to support all kinds of different theories. So I'll give you a clue. Darwin had two of those. One of his evidences for evolution was the fossil record. So he would advocate that at the beginning of his life and the development of his theory, that the fossils would document that evolution happened. So he also had another line of reasoning that supported this idea that evolution was fact. So I'm not going to leave you hanging too long, but basically the evidences that evolutionists would claim are support this idea that evolution took place. First is the fossil record, that we've got things like this and things like this that are layered in the history or the layers of the earth that support the fact that evolution happened.
Where'd that come from? No, I mean, not, where did those come from?
The theories, the fossils,
The fossils?
they're scattered all over the earth, all the way around and in different layers.
But where did they come from?
We'll talk about that. Let's hold that one a little bit. So another thought was that Darwin observed when he was sailing around the earth in the Beagle, the ship that he was in, was homologies. He looked at all kinds of different animals and saw similarities in their development. He studied a lot of sparrows and birds and saw slight variations in those animals. And he saw that as evidence that this is remnant information or remnant examples of evolution happening. So, and this whole tree that you see off on the side is just taking those homologies, those similar physical characteristics that we see on the outside, as being evidence of this evolutionary tree of life. So, ultimately, homologies would start out with, at some point there was a single cell. The first living organism was a single cell. And that just became more complex, developing into more and more complex life forms, ultimately, in the end, leading to humans, us. Distribution in time and space. That talks about the necessity that the Earth has to be billions of years old, because evolution couldn't happen without extremely long periods of time. The other part of that theory is plate tectonics, looking at the form of the Earth and seeing how these different continents look and appear as though they have moved over vast amounts of time. That Europe and America, South America and Africa were at one point all connected, and there was land bridges, animals were able to move back and forth. This whole evolutionary thing could have happened without, these big oceans separating everything. And then last one is evidences by example. They look at dogs and this ability to breed dogs and breed all kinds of different versions of a dog, different versions of a horse, different versions of birds. We can breed animals to create higher functioning animals. Dogs that are super sensitive to smell and can smell out drugs. Dogs that are super fast and can race fast. Things like that. Horses that are good for pulling plows and horses that are good for running races. So evidence by example is that thought. So the next question would be, so what are the evidences for creation? This is what an evolutionist would claim. These are the things that support my theory, or support, in their mind, the fact that evolution took place. what are some of the evidences that creation explains everything? I'm hoping you guys are.
It's all the same stuff. Fossil work, you know, I think that just the fossils, I think with the flood, and I don't know, there's so many.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that answer. That's
The
perfect.
flood would be perfect to leave all these layers, you know?
Okay.
You know, they show footprints of man way back when,
Yeah.
and yet they don't regard that as far as being man was there during creation. But the thing is for like Darwin here, or whoever is in the evolution thing, I don't know what his background of growing up, if it was any kind of religious or not.
His mother was a Christian.
Huh?
His mother was a
Right.
Christian.
But at some point, he got the wrong idea, thinking that evolution is looking at all these things going on.
Mhm.
So he really did not believe that God was God, because he's looking at creation, thinking that creation evolved by itself. Because if you had a belief in God, then you would say, I was created. And so all these artifacts that you got right there, and as you drive through other states, you see those different layers and stuff like that, and along the highways and stuff like that. You'll know, well, at least we know, that when the flood came, the settling of the, because there was turmoil in the waters at that time too, so dinosaurs, a whale stuck on the side of the mountain,
Uh-huh.
I mean, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so yeah, exactly. I think, it's like the fossil record and things like that are the preposition that I hope to expound on is that the very same 4 areas that scientists would use to support their theory of evolution are exactly the same 4 areas that I would say support the theory of creation. A little bit of a definition of evolution. So it's the belief that 3.8 billion years ago, some kind of single cell organism happened. There was a cosmic goo filled up with all kinds of chemicals, and some kind of electrical charge hit it, and all of these chemicals came together and formed the first living cell. And from there, through a process of the real genius that Darwin had wasn't that he came up with the theory of evolution, because others had it before him, but he came up with a mechanism that would support in a kind of an intelligent fashion how evolution could happen. So his theory was that there's random mutations, and through that, survival of the fittest that would allow life forms to get more and more complex. So something mutates. If it's a good mutation, it's going to be stronger. It's going to be able to survive in the world better than if it's a bad mutation. So survival of the fittest. The best mutations continue to propagate. The bad mutations weed themselves out. So the true genius of Darwin is the development of this theory of the mechanism of how evolution would propagate itself. So, one of the little excerpt out of this, it mentions that that we would see these characteristics develop, but also through metaphysiological traits and DNA sequences and things like that. All of those would be part of this development, this evolutionary process. So, evidences for creation, I'm claiming, or creationists would claim that they're the same 4 things, but there's also a bunch of other evidence would come to support that. Irreducibly complex systems. So, an irreducibly complex system is something that, for example, a mousetrap. You've got a board, you've got a little trigger, there's this bar that flips, there's a spring that powers it, You've got the 5 different components to the very simplest mousetrap. If you take any one of those components out of that mousetrap, and those components all have to be perfectly aligned for the mousetrap to work. If you take any one of those components out, the mousetrap doesn't work. So, for a mousetrap to work, all of these 5 components have to be there perfectly in place at the same time for it to function. So, historical evidence, I'll elaborate that on a little bit more. Geological evidence, pre-biological evolution, and beauty, art, and whimsy. So pre-biological evolution, Darwin's theory of random mutations and survival of the fittest explains how living organisms would evolve, but it doesn't explain how something before life would evolve. So if human or living life on Earth started 3.8 billion years ago, and the universe is 13.8 billion years old, there's all this stuff that had to evolve before that, before life started, that would explain rocks and crystals and all of the elements of the periodic table. So let's see. Let's start with the fossil record. So according to the fossil record, there should be all of these layers of sedimentary rock with the very simplest life forms down on the bottom, and then more complex life forms starting at the top. So in the Precambrian period, that's when, and that's what, 4,000 to 500 million years ago, that's when single-cell organisms happened. Cambrian period, that's where trilobites and annamites showed up, a little bit more complicated animals, and then it just keeps going on up from there, up to like 1.5 million years ago when we showed up. So, evolutionaries thought on that. But what does the fossil record really show us? So, according to evolutionists, there should be a geological column somewhere in the world that shows at the very bottom of all of these sedimentary layers, simple life forms in the bottom, more complex layers in the top. Each layer is deposited over millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. There should be these guys on the bottom and us up on the top. There's nowhere in the world where that column exists. You were kind of alluding to it. There's places where we can find human footprints and dinosaur footprints in the same layer. It doesn't work. So what the fossil record does show us is in that layer, the Cambrian period, that's where almost all of life forms show up. They refer to it as, going back, the Cambrian explosion. That's what the fossil record shows. This is an excerpt out of Wikipedia. It's not a Christian source. For the most part, the quotes and sources that I quote here are not Christian sources. They're not people that are inclined to support creation theory. They're the reference books that we use. So this is kind of a struggle. Darwin, by the time he died, said this is the biggest thing that causes me distress. I don't know how to explain it. The question as to why we do not find fossil deposits belonging to these earliest forms, I can't give any satisfactory answer to why that doesn't happen. So a lot of geological research was happening during his lifetime. He came up with this theory before a lot of these fossils were discovered. And by the end of his lifetime, there was enough fossil evidence already to cause him to question his own theory. You mentioned what kind of background did Darwin come from. His mother was a Christian, and there's some reference, it's not really well documented, that Darwin might have become a Christian and gone back to his origins of faith by the time he died.
I've heard that.
I've heard that. And
Yeah.
that he said, no, kind of taken out of context. And
Yeah. So this is but evolutionists still consider Darwin their father. And their savior
Darwin.
kind of turned his back on them. So anyway, there should be some of these very same things in very small type on your sheet. I don't want to read all of it because that just gets boring. I did pick this particular fossil example up there for a reason, but we'll explain that a little bit more later. So again, the fossil record really supports this idea that all life form showed up all at the same one time. You mentioned the flood. You know, it's kind of like all of these layers look like something like that happened. So it's not just that all of these life forms showed up at the same time. It's that some of the things that these fossils show capture what was going on when these fossils were formed. This is a sea animal giving birth. It's somehow, at the very instant that this animal was giving birth, it was frozen in time. That doesn't go along with evolutionary theory as to the idea that fossils are an example of an animal dying, falling to the bottom of a swamp, layers of stuff falling on top of them, a combination of more layers, more weight, more heat, compressing them into a flat existence over millions of years, were formed. These fossil records suggest that something instantaneous happened. A fish eating another fish. A fish giving birth. And there's not just one example of this stuff. There's a plethora of examples of fossils. Fish eating fish. This is some kind of sea creature capturing a bird and eating it. It's the fossil record shows evidence of something catastrophic happening, something very instantaneous that froze their existence in a moment, not millions of years. You can't capture this event over a period of a million years. This is what the fossil record shows. You won't find this in a high school science class. So here's another one. This is just a whole swarm, a whole school of sea animals swimming together. You can see their motions are all unified. And all of them at the same time were frozen in that moment. So homologies. This is again that idea that we can look at similar characteristics and look at that tree that you see kind of in the back, and that being evidence for evolution. You just follow those similar forms, physical characteristics of those, and that is what implies a common descent or a common ancestry. Richard Dawkins is this first guy. He's evolutionary theorist, molecular biologist. He's a leading scientist in the world, but he's also one of the leading voices in the world that's written dozens of books supporting or arguing for this case that evolution explains everything. And Richard Dawkins takes it to the point where our feelings of love, our spirit, our soul, are all just chemical reactions that have evolved through a scientifically explained process. Dawkins does not believe in God in any way, shape, or form, and he believes that and advocates quite prolifically. His purpose in life is to lecture all over the world, write books, and communicate that God does not exist. And evolution explains everything. Back in 2011, Dawkins was on a panel of 13 of some of the leading scientists in the world, and they were talking about life and just their theories of how the world came to be. And another man, Craig Ventner, was on that same panel. Craig Ventner is the leading genetic scientist in the world right now. He's the first man to map out the whole human DNA, the whole DNA sequence, mapping out which parts of DNA control which parts of our development, our growth, and what determines that we got blue eyes, no hair, lots of hair, whatever. So, Dr. Craig Ventner is throughout the whole world really considered to be one of the foremost scientists in the world. The Dawkins and Ventner were on the same panel, recorded. You can see the whole discussion. And Dawkins claims that, and he's claimed this before, that if there is any variation in that core genetic code, it would totally destroy our theory of evolution. He's said this numerous times. And the idea kind of goes along with things that you've heard of, Ancestry.com, 23andMe, different. You can go and give them a sample, a swab out of your mouth, and they'll tell you where your family origins are, and they can help you find. Basically, I did the Ancestry.com thing, and it was really cool. It was fun, It's it supported a lot of the things that I knew about my family. I knew that, they came through Prussia, through Germany and Switzerland, and there's some British in there. It all made sense. It all added up. Well, you theoretically, or not theoretically, scientifically, you can use that same principle to trace DNA back allegedly to the first single cell. There would have to be core genetic links in that DNA that would go back to the single cell. It doesn't stop just with your ancestors from 1,500 years ago. DNA should be able to map it all the way to the beginning. So, at this panel discussion, Dawkins makes that claim that if we found one core variation, it would be destructive to the whole theory. At that point, Dr. Ventner makes this comment. I think the tree of life. Yes?
When they talk about so false, I've seen a lot of things are saying that they can get DNA out of these things here.
Mm-hmm.
But they're talking millions of years. How are they going to get DNA out? It's to be able to go back and find their origins of these things, because it's dead. I'm literally dead. There's no.
The DNA doesn't. I mean, we use it in court cases.
But I mean, it's not. They're talking about tissue. They're finding tissue that's from a thing that's millions of years old.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to find tissue from something that's all dried out?
Okay. Well, we don't have to go back to the first cell. We can go back to, we've got. So not everything that's been preserved is preserved in a fossil form, although we can get DNA evidence out of fossil forms. There's other things like insects that were preserved in amber as opposed to preserved in sedimentary rock. There's animals that were frozen, woolly mammoths. If you look around Siberia, Alaska, northern Canada, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of animals' life forms that catastrophically were frozen in a moment of time. It's not just fossils that were preserved. There was something that happened that changed the environment in a very cataclysmic way. We can take the DNA from those and compare them. But even what Dr. Ventnor is actually claiming here is if we look at us in a chimpanzee, there should be the same core genetic codes within a chimp and within us if we come from the same genetic train. So we don't need the old ones. The old ones help, but just the fact that a chimp doesn't have some of these core genetic codes as we do does exactly what Dawkins said would be devastating. So what Craig Ventnor, and Craig Ventnor is an atheist. He still claims to be an atheist. He doesn't believe in God. I think that the Tree of Life is an artifact of some early scientific studies that aren't holding up. The Tree of Life doesn't work. If we're going to argue this case, we need another theory because this one doesn't work. And this is coming from, it's not a preacher, it's not a Christian. It's a scientist that has done his homework, and he's one of the few that actually has the guts to stand up in front of the world and say it doesn't work. That's homologies. So Dawkins, he's got some books that explicitly go after God. But Dawkins, he's very scientific, but he does have a reputation sometimes of saying things and then getting busted with them. Obviously, in this panel, Craig Ventnor did just that in public. This is Dr. Craig Ventnor. I kind of like him; he's cool. But I like the fact that he's got the guts to say something like that in front of a panel. He didn't. It's like this is in public, and he's saying, "Guys, if we're going to argue a case, we need a better argument." So, distribution in time and space. Another question. Distribution in time and space, that's that idea that it's billions of years that life form took place. And there's this migration of Earth continents and stuff like that that created this possibility for life form to evolve and distribute itself around the Earth. So, question, how do we know how old something is? How do we know this trilobite is 550 million years old? This is Annamite, another similar life form that, according to evolutionists, would be 550
That's wishful thinking.
million years old. How do we know how old they are?
They just
It's
guess.
not like a carbon dating or something. Carbon-14.
Carbon dating, carbon-14 dating, that's one. Good,
I was
thank
like,
you.
is that a thing? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Was it carbon dating?
I must admit, the high school kids did really good at some of these questions. I mean, because, they're right out of science class,
Right,
yeah.
fresh.
So another one would be uranium-234, 235 through 238. Basically, the idea that there's certain molecules, elements that are unstable. They deteriorate over time. Carbon-14 is one of those unstable isotopes. If you just leave it, it disintegrates. So, carbon-14 is formed in the atmosphere. It's absorbed into plants through photosynthesis. And plants continue to acquire and assimilate carbon-14 over their lifespan. At the point where that plant dies, that assimilation stops. And the deterioration starts. And you can look at a plant and see how much of the carbon-14 is intact and how much is deteriorated. And knowing the half-life of that carbon-14 determine how old it is. It's science, it makes sense. The problem with carbon-14 dating is that carbon-14 has what they call a half-life of a little over 5,000 years. And you can only use that period of deterioration for a period of 10 cycles. So 5,000 times 10 means that you can date something up to 50,000 years old. After that, carbon-14 doesn't work anymore. So we're told that this is 550 million years old by a system that only goes back 50,000 years. And I've tried really hard to find scientists. How do we know how old this is? Google it. Try to find it. We don't get a scientific method that tells us that this is 550 million years old. They'll tell us that we use carbon-14, but carbon-14 doesn't work. Carbon-14 dating only works on plants, something that assimilated carbon-14. It also works with animals because all animals in some form have digested plants. So carbon-14 only works with every living organism. The other dating system is uranium. That only works on igneous and metamorphic rocks, or like rocks like granite, crystals, lava, things like that. It doesn't work on sedimentary or life form rocks. So we can't date life forms with uranium dating. We're still used to tell that that's how we know how old it is. So basically, the prime 2 clocks that evolutionists use, I'm saying don't work. So we need some kind of other clock that would tell us, explain how this happened, how this works. Any ideas what some other clocks might be? I mean,
The Bible.
okay, you're exactly right. That is one of them. But it's not just the Bible. It's like every civilization around the world. If you go to Mayan, Hindu, Aztec, every world civilization has got their calendar. And all of the calendars throughout the earth of these other civilizations, for the most part, go back 5,000 to 6,000 years ago.
So then if they can only go back 5,000 years, how can you say that these other things are going? The Earth is 5 million years old. I mean,
We don't have a civilization that claims that the Earth is, and this.
Well,
I mean,
but nobody claims that people have been around
No.
5 million years ago. That's
No.
kind of the argument from the evolutionary standpoint. People showed up 6,000 years ago.
According to evolutionary theory,
Right.
that it's 1.8 million years ago that humans showed up.
a million years.
That's still a lot more than.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. So it just is that opportunity to look at how they line up and just realize. But so you would think you would see 1 point some millions of
something in there that like did that.
calendar.
Yeah, and to your point, I think every one of these arguments that I'm espousing, I think I could come up with a scientific way to argue the other point.
Probably.
I could argue evolution. I mean, it's like, the fossil record, there was some kind of cataclysmic event that happened, and it froze life in a moment. But that's what life looked like at that moment. That doesn't necessarily mean that creation happened. It just means that the only picture we have of life throughout the whole history of the Earth is that one moment when a cataclysmic event happened. So it doesn't, the fossil record doesn't prove that creation took place. It just doesn't support the idea that evolution, you can't say that the fossil record documents our evolution because it doesn't. It just documents that at some point there was a cataclysmic event that froze a picture in time. So we could go through every one of those things. I'm just saying that that one doesn't do it. So,
Well, with the proof of these fish and these other animals that did exist
mhm.
a long time ago, we don't know what time, a long time ago, and if there is something, a cataclysmic happening, such as freezing or an explosion,
Mhm.
how can that give life? How can that start it all over again? Perfectly.
Yeah. And let me see. We'll come touch on that a little bit more later. Okay. Yeah, how could it? Yeah. But this cataclysmic event allegedly happened significantly after this evolution, most of this evolutionary process took place. So we need some kind of a clock that measures how this whole development, how old that trilobite is, and there is, or how old the Earth is, and if the Earth is in fact 3.8 billion years old and the universe is 13.8 billion years old, there should be some kind of a clock that measures that. The reason that we believe that the universe is 13.8 billion light years old is because we see stars, or we believe what we can measure through different scientific methods that I believe are legitimate. The diameter of the universe is 13.8 billion light years across, which is a number that's mind-boggling. 1 light year is light travels at 186,000 miles per second. So if light travels at 186,000 miles per second, and you map that out for 1 year, light travels somewhere between 5 and 6 trillion miles in 1 year. 5 and 6 trillion miles in 1 year. And if the universe is 13.8 billion light years, that's 13.8 times 5 trillion. It's really, really, really big numbers. For me, this is like the point. My God, is that big? What the heck? How is, I mean, the verse, how are you mindful of me? How do you think of me when you can create something 13.8 billion light years across? It's a number, and how do you, it's like, I think the verse says, how are you mindful of me? But how am I'm not mindful of you. And
Not just that, but like you're thinking about it, what about Dawkins and the other people, these other scientists can take those figures and come up with a reasonable answer? I mean, that there is a scientific answer, or is there a creator?
Yeah. So the speed of light is like 1 clock. Boom. So some of the clocks, radiocarbon dating, it only works up to 50,000 years. Uranium dating, it's got a much longer, it's got a half-life of 10 million years. How do we know that uranium has a half-life of 10 million years? Because nobody's measured it.
Right.
You can kind of plot it out. There's some scientific things that would support that. However, and if you read all of this stuff, they'll claim that there's certain things that could totally mess up that. And there's things that would, there's the same things that would mess up the carbon-14 dating would be things that would mess up uranium dating. So, but according to uranium dating, we can measure things up to like millions of years, lots of millions of years. But it only works on metamorphic and igneous rock. So, anyway, this is one of the things I really like. This is another one of these atheists, Craig Ventnor. I can't pronounce his name. Does anybody here speak Spanish?
That's not Spanish.
It's not Spanish?
No, it's,
Oh, that's not Spanish. That looks like Portuguese.
Portuguese.
Okay. Can you pronounce it?
No.
I don't know. J,
Vallejo? I don't know.
something like that.
Vallejo.
Anyway, he's a
That's
theoretical
Portuguese.
theoretical physicist out of Oxford University. He's brilliant, and he had enough guts to write a book on the speed of light. So basically, let's step back. Einstein, one of Einstein's tenets was that the speed of light is a constant. It doesn't change. And, E equals mc squared. All of Einstein's theories are based on this one premise that the speed of light is a constant, and we can use that to figure out all kinds of things. So scientists have been trying to figure out this whole Big Bang theory. Not only did evolution of man, but the whole creation of the universe. If there was at some point this point of origin where all of the matter, all of the energy of the universe was at one point in a ball this big. And so you take that whole universe, you condense it down to there. Its energy keeps spinning around and it explodes. It creates this big bang and sends stuff out throughout the universe. We should be able to calculate the original mass of the universe, the original energy of the universe, and we should be able to map out, the speed, rate of expansion, and figure that out. And I don't know how that works, but scientists have been trying to figure that out, and it doesn't work. There's something called a universal constant, a number that they're looking for that would explain the physical mathematics of how this works. Einstein came up with his theory of relativity that explains the motions of all kinds of bodies, the planets, gravity, speed of light, and it all works out together. It's a beautiful theory that explains lots of stuff. But he couldn't rationalize it and figure it out and put it together with quantum theory, or the theory of motion of super small particles. Atoms and electrons don't play by the rules of the theory of general relativity. And when we look at the universe, it doesn't play to the right rules either. So we've been trying to figure that out, trying to find a mathematical formula that explains how the universe is growing and expanding. So they've come up with some pretty wild theories. I consider them wild. String theory, which basically says that this world that we live in, with height, width, length, and time, the 4 different dimensions, are just the start of it. What they're claiming, string theory, is that there is a lot more dimensions that we don't know about. And we don't know what those dimensions look like because we're trapped in this world that we see with width, depth, height, and time. So they use that string theory to advocate that there's dimensions we don't have a clue about that make it all work. Another one of the theories has to do with dark energy and dark matter, or types of energy and types of matter that we don't have a clue what they are. But we know, just to explain the universe, there has to be so much more energy and so much more mass in this universe to be able to explain the motions, because Einstein and quantum theory and theory of relativity don't explain what's going on in the universe that we see. So string theory, dark energy, dark matter are attempts to kind of come up with it, but it's saying the explanation is beyond our ability to see and understand. There's something out there that's beyond. So the beauty of this book is that he suggests if the speed of light isn't a constant, if the speed of light has been slowing down over a period of time, it changes everything. It changes carbon-14 dating. It changes uranium-234 dating, because those dating systems are based on the speed of an electron going around an atom. The rate of decay is based on the speed of light. If the speed of light was significantly faster or slower, that rate of decay would change correspondingly. So what he suggests is that the speed of light has slowed down radically over a period of time. It was much faster earlier in history. This book has a chart that documents over the last 300 years that over the last 300 years we've been able to measure the speed of light. 300 years ago the system was much more primitive, but we can still apply a factor of error or safety factor on that. And over the last 300 years that we've measured the speed of light, it's slowed down by 1%. That's over 300 years. If you take that and multiply it, the speed of light was radically faster not that long ago, which means our dating systems, uranium-234, carbon-14, the numbers are not even close. The Portuguese guy claims that you don't need dark energy and you don't need dark matter and you don't need string theory. If the speed of light changed like that, all of the mathematical formulas start to line up. It all works. We can explain the whole universe real simple if we just let the speed of light vary. Let it change. The math all starts to work. He's not the only scientist that's explained it. Dr. Brown in the Minds of Men talks about it. There's another theoretical physicist in Australia that's claimed the same thing. The problem with this is if you use that theory, the Earth is only 10,000 years old. The universe is only 10,000 years old. He's not going to be a popular speaker because, just like Craig Ventnor, he's saying things that don't conform with what we want to hear. The first guy that came up with the theory of evolution admitted that I need this theory because the thought of a God is so repulsive to me. So it's not a scientific reason. It's like, I can't buy this God thing. I've got to find another way. So